I'm going to tell the story of two leaves and a bud. It's a story of rivers, mountains, history, politics, imperialism, espionage and addiction. It's the story of tea. Those little green leaves that changed the world. The plant loved so much by the British, we made it our very own national drink. The thirst for tea led the British on an extraordinary adventure, travelling across the globe in search of this precious leaf. Now I'm going to make that journey. I'm going to show you how our nice cup of tea brought East and West together. Thank you. How it triggered wars, helped us win them, and even sparked the occasional revolution. From the back streets of Calcutta to the soaring skyline of Shanghai, we'll be delving into a world of chaiwallas, opium smokers, and cross elephants. And we're going to find out how this exotic, fragrant leaf became an indispensable part of the British way of life.
Tea is a social drink. You make a cup of coffee, you make a pot of tea.
How it helps us connect and pulls us together.
It can console you, there's the warmth and the ritual. You know, you've got to boil the kettle, you've got to get the sugar, you've got to ask what they want, you've got to engage with them.
How it keeps us going, we can't really manage without it.
One day I decided to try to have a complete day without tea. I was quite shaken. I was quite disturbed.
So how did we get to be so crackers about tea? Out of all the drinks in all the world, why are we addicted to this one? I tell you what, put the kettle on, let's have a nice cup of tea and find out. Hi, a cup of tea, please. This is such a familiar thing, isn't it, to most of us, to come into a cafe, plonk ourselves down, have a cup of tea. Thank you. Thanks. We are a nation of tea drinkers. It's a very British thing to have a nice cup of tea. It's a dull, brown, mundane accompaniment to our ordinary life. But tea is extraordinary. And the passion the British felt for it altered history, started wars, drove the British Empire, changed political alliances. And it's just a little leaf and a bud, and it transformed the world. Tea is the most popular drink on the planet, after water, which doesn't really count. In this country alone, we get through more than 60 billion cups a year, and it's trickled down through our society, starting at the top, naturally. You can't trickle upwards. Is this Earl Grey?
This is Earl Grey.
Tea in Britain started life as an aristocratic luxury, but it spilled out from our stately homes to every old home and every cafe and cab rank, to ballrooms and building sites.
All I can say is it's a long day without a cup of tea, isn't it? Yeah. It's a very long day without a cup of tea.
And in the brave new world of macchiatos and flat whites, we still get through nearly 3 teas for every coffee. How much do you drink, Tracy, in a day?
6, 7, 8,
Yeah?
anything.
It's good for you, though.
Cup of tea, cup of tea.
You've just got to take care of yourself.
And somehow for us, it's more than just a hot drink. It's become the answer to everything.
A nice cup of tea.
More than just a soap opera staple, tea was part of our finest hour.
Played a big part, let me tell you. To be without tea was to be without life, flying, you know.
Somehow drinking tea has become part of being British, part of our DNA.
You need it just to wind down from the stress.
It keeps you calm.
And it doesn't get more English than a cup of tea.
But tea isn't English or British. I have to break the news to you, it's foreign. And the story of tea starts almost 5,000 years ago, almost 5,000 miles in that direction. There's nearly 40 different countries growing tea now. But in the 17th century, when we got our first taste of it, it was only grown in one country, China. China then was a secretive and mysterious country, closed off from the West. But their tea and our need for it would change all that. Modern China is a nation of 1.3 billion people, a 21st century superpower, and it's the first step on my great tea odyssey. Well, we've just landed in China. This is Shanghai International Airport. Just a little hint, bright coloured tags on your luggage make it easier to identify. That's it, that's me. Let's go and discover the exciting history of tea, shall we? When the first tea traders from the British East India Company arrived down the coast in Canton, it was just the halfway point in a hazardous round trip that would take more than 2 years. So I shouldn't really complain about my journey, a flight and then a short ride in a fast machine. This is the maglev, short for magnetic levitation, obviously. They say the fastest train in the world. I've sent a party of train spotters on ahead just to check the Chinese haven't made that up. So, we're whizzing into Shanghai. And yes, it's fast. So is the British Pendolino. Let's just think about tea, shall we? We think of ourselves as a nation of tea drinkers, but the Chinese make more tea than anywhere else in the world. And they were drinking it long before we even heard of it. Once we did hear about it, and once we tasted it, we loved it. And if we wanted to get it, this is where we had to come. Shanghai played a huge role in the story of China, Britain and tea. When we went tea crazy, we were desperate to open Shanghai up to trade, which we probably didn't do in the most tactful way. I'm coming to that later. But it's partly because of tea that Shanghai is now China's most modern and westernised city. In fact, to the casual glance, if it wasn't that I seemed to be the only person with highlights, you could be anywhere in the Western world. So I just need to track down the tea. This is Nanjing Road in Shanghai, Shanghai's main shopping street. It's like Oxford Street actually at Christmas Eve. And one reason it looks like Oxford Street is that all the shops are very familiar, but the only thing I've not managed to find so far is a tea shop. I don't feel I've quite plugged into the heart of ancient China. So I'm just taking part in traditional Shanghai life. Yes, I'm in Starbucks, and it is exactly the same as any other Starbucks. It's absolutely heaving. I've been queuing for days. With a generation of young people all looking towards the West, I guess it's not surprising that coffee would be taking over from an old tradition. But there is tea running through the heart of Shanghai. One of the city's most interesting restaurants is Madame Kui Ping's. She not only serves tea, her food is cooked with tea. For once, as a vegetarian, there's lots for me to choose from. And they really make it an event. Oh my lord, it's a pagoda.
这道菜叫柳浪围，是杭州西湖十景之一。它呢有一个典故，说在宋时呢，此地是一个御花园，春天时繁华满枝。这里所有的菜都是比较清淡，不含酱油、不含味精的。
Thank you.
谢谢。
Yeah, minestrone is off. Madame Kui Ping learnt about tea when she was sent to an ancient tea-growing area during the Cultural Revolution. I know she looks like the love child of Mary Quant and a Bond villain, but she's really interesting to talk to.
这个健康的方式呢，其实对我们来讲呢，也是非常重要的。
She's talking about the health properties of tea. It's antioxidant, anti-free radical, anti-aging. She's saying she's 60 years old and she doesn't have a single white hair. Yeah, well, I'm 59, I have highlights. It's a different culture, get over it. That's really nice. I do love soup, but I'm not doing the story of soup. I'm trying to get to grips with tea, and I don't feel I've quite got to the heart of it yet. Shanghai is important, as we'll see, but it's not where the story truly begins. I think if I'm going to get to grips with the oldest and most sophisticated tea culture in the world, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. This is one of the most spectacular places I've ever been to. This is Wuyi Mountain, on the northern border of Fujian province. I've left the city far behind to come to one of China's oldest tea-growing areas. Some of the first tea we ever tasted in Britain, more than 300 years ago, grew here on these hillsides. It came right down from the top of the mountain. It was carried by Chinese peasants in packs on bamboo poles. They brought it down the mountain, it was rafted along. So by the time it started its sea voyage, it had already travelled 1,000 miles. And that's why the tea was so precious. It could easily be damaged or lost on the way. The stuff that actually reached the London docks was incredibly expensive. We're all drinking it now, but then only the rich could afford it, and it was kept in locked caddies so the servants could never have a sneaky cuppa. Of course, we were desperate to find out how it grew, but the Chinese would never let us further inland than the coast, though one or two did try. By the end of the 18th century, the British had gone absolutely crackers for tea, and they literally couldn't get enough. So the hunt was on to find tea seeds, to find methods of growing tea, to see if we could grow it somewhere else and not be dependent on the Chinese for trade. So this gentleman called Robert Fortune worked in the Botanical Gardens in Chiswick in the 1840s. He actually came down this very river, which he calls the Stream of Nine Windings, to see if he could get seeds, get information, get plants and bring them back. Well, to penetrate into the heart of China, he had to dress as a Chinese person. He even had to grow his hair into a pigtail, which must have been quite a novelty in Chiswick at that time. I don't think we have botanical espionage in quite the same way, but plants like the nutmeg, sugarcane and the rubber tree were hugely valuable to the empire, and the tea bush was the most sought after and would be the most lucrative, if they could find it. And here it is. This bush, the Camellia sinensis, is the tea plant, and this is the plant that's become the most important plant in the world because all tea comes from this. But those first tea hunters didn't know that. They thought green tea and black tea came from different plants. I'm sad for us, we didn't know anything. But the Chinese, they knew everything. I'm here to meet a man who grows tea the traditional way, the way they've been growing it for thousands of years. Master Zhu grows his tea in the shadow of Wuyi Mountain. It's in demand from connoisseurs across the world. Lu Zhou has come from her specialist tea company in London to sample the recent harvest.
Welcome to Wuyi Mountain.
Thank you very much. It's very beautiful. When I asked him about his tea, I got something a bit more interesting than a sales pitch.
He thinks the tea leaves brings friendship to other people,
right.
And by drinking the tea from the Wuyi Mountain, you can experience the nature and people's skill as well.
So Lou,
yes,
what's the skill in plucking tea?
The most important thing you need to remember is not just grab it.
No.
You need to use two fingers just to pick. When you see like 3 to 4 leaves, it's okay, and see the bud.
Yeah.
So you just pick like this.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Very good.
Is it fun?
Yes, it's fun. I'd love to do the whole 4 acres if I had more time. So, is this plant, Camellia, is it a tree or is it a bush?
They are trees, and you trim it to keep it this height.
For the
but
picking.
if you don't trim it, see that high two taller trees?
So
those
little
these
scraggly
two?
ones?
Yes, these are also tea trees. If you don't trim these trees, they grow.
Yeah,
tall.
Then you need very, very tall ladies.
You can.
I can't help noticing, looking at packets of tea that have pictures of ladies on, it's always the ladies that are picking the tea.
Yes.
Why would that be?
They care more about the details, and also they have lots of heavier work for the man to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Do these ladies like picking tea, do you think?
Shall I ask them?
Yeah.
你喜欢采茶吗？那我问你喜欢。Like
What
she
choice
likes
does
it.
she have? She's going to say yes. She's on camera. The man she's working for is just around the corner. So yeah, she loves it. The legend in China is that tea, or chai, was discovered by the Emperor Shennong in 2737 BC, when some stray leaves blew into his cup of hot water. Either not noticing or not caring that the water had turned brown, he drank it and found it refreshing and invigorating. Just think, if he'd been washing his socks in hot water and a leaf had blown into one of them, he could have invented the tea bag. The Buddhists have their own myth about tea, and it's that Buddha had made a vow to meditate and stay awake for 9 years, and then after 7 years he fell asleep, and he was so enraged that he tore off his eyelids and threw them and scattered them on the ground, and they took root and became tea. And he took up a leaf and chewed it, and that kept him awake. The Buddhists were the first to cultivate tea. They were the first to trim it down from a tree to a bush. Fortune, the plant hunter, was heading here for the Chanxing Yongle Temple in Wuyi. He'd heard stories of monks who grew their own tea, a tea they called Da Hong Pao, red robe tea, a tea whose taste was said to be beyond compare. Of course, when monks were first using tea here, making tea, they were using it as a medicine, not as a drink. And when tea first arrived in Britain, it was sold in apothecaries. Today, the monks of Chanxing Yongle still drink and make their own tea. Their head monk, Master Shi, told me it's a vital part of their daily ritual. He told me they drink it in the morning, they offer it to the Buddha at noon, and they drink it in the evening when they meditate. In ancient China, they believed that tea cleared the throat, brightened the eyes, comforted the muscles, and eased the veins. And they still feel now it's hugely beneficial, that when they drink it, their qi and their blood are vitalised, and they're stronger and more energetic. Robert Fortune, our pig-tailed plant hunter from Chiswick, was on the right track. In the shadows of the temple lay the most famous tea bushes in China. All red robe tea came originally from these 3 bushes, known simply as the mother trees. They're one of China's top tourist attractions. I'm going to go and see them. So, I'm very excited. I'm a bit like David Attenborough, you know, on the hunt for a rare sort of lemur, because I'm looking for the mother trees, and hundreds of millions of people in China come to see them. So I'm very excited. That's them. That's them. Yep, there's 3 bushes behind a wall. That's what everybody else is looking at. I suppose we'd be the same with privet, wouldn't we? If we had a privet museum and we sat in a tea house and looked at some privet bushes behind a wall, we'd be excited. Or would we? It wouldn't be a visitor centre without a cafe, and here they serve their local delicacy. They're called tea eggs, and they are eggs which have been hard-boiled in red robe tea. Okay, that's it. It smells like an egg, actually doesn't smell any different. That's really nice. It's like just got really salty. And really, because my palate was ruined by wine gums as a child, I probably can't really taste the red robe tea in the white, but I can taste the salt in the yolk. It's really nice. And then you have it, excuse me, talking my mouth full, you have it with the red robe tea, which is really, really diluted. Otherwise this would be about 500 quid's worth in this bowl. It's really thinly let down. It's really nice. I've got it all. Tea egg, tea, bushes. I'm living the dream. They're so respectful of their tea in China, not just preserving those rather straggly old bushes, but they have a beautiful modern museum just devoted to tea. This is the National Tea Museum in Hangzhou, full of gorgeous ancient objects beautifully displayed. There's a very hushed, reverential atmosphere. Look at this, it's really sweet. The children possibly not quite up to speed with the whole reverence and respect thing, but very friendly, very keen to show off their English, and very diligent in checking that the ancient tea twisting machine was still just about working. Now, green tea is a staple in every dreary detox regime, but when tea first came to Britain, it was green tea. People were detoxing without even knowing about it. And in modern China, green tea is still the thing, as I shall now demonstrate tomorrow's world style. Just lock the children out for a minute so we can show you this very, very interesting pie chart, which will show you the green. You see, that's people drink green tea in China. 12% of people drink oolong tea, which is not orange, but on this diagram it is. 11%. That's rather vague, isn't it? Another tea. Like what? I don't know what. And 7% drink black tea. I hope that's made everything very clear. Thank you. Strangely, the centrepiece of the museum's garden isn't a pie chart, it's a statue. This is Lu Yu, whose 8th century book, The Classic of Tea, is still the definitive work on the subject. For Lu Yu, tea symbolised the harmony and unity of the universe. So this is what Lu Yu wrote about his favourite drink. The best quality tea must have creases like the leather boot of a Tartar horseman, curl like the dewlap of a mighty bullock, unfold like a mist rising out of a ravine, gleam like a lake touched by a zephyr, and be wet and soft like a fine earth newly swept by rain. I suppose you couldn't really write that about cocoa. The Chinese had turned the making and drinking of tea into an art form. Lu Yu said tea had to pass through 6 stages involving 24 different implements before you could even get the biscuits out. The plucking that we saw, that's just the first stage in a long and intricate process.
By shaking the leaves, they can make the edges of the leaves break and help the leaves to be oxidized. And then the fragrance and the taste will improve.
Right.
Yeah.
So the ladies who pluck that tea,
They go rest.
They don't do this?
Yes. No, they don't do this. It's man's job.
It's a man's job to
Yeah.
wave bamboo about, not a
It
lady's.
is.
So it's been plucked and tossed, and now it's being rolled in a hot wok. He says he doesn't burn his hands because he only touches the leaves, but looks dicey, doesn't it? And just so you know, black tea, green tea, white tea and oolong tea are all from the same bush. They're all from the camellia bush. And black tea is oxidised tea. Green tea is tea that's been roasted but not oxidised. White tea, nobody's done anything to it at all. And oolong tea, which is what we're watching now, has been partly oxidised, and the oxidisation stops with the roasting. Everybody got that? When I said roasting, I meant toasting. So sorry, everybody. Please don't write in. It's been toasted myself. So what they're doing now with that rolling is that they're pressing the leaves and they're making them that long characteristic shape, and oolong means black dragon, so they're making them into the shape of black dragon, but it's also bringing out the flavour and the smell of the leaves. And of course, having taken so much trouble to bring out the flavour, they're not just going to stick it in a mug on the dashboard and grab a slurp at the traffic lights.
To keep them, if this tea is good, you need to brew it 7 times.
Right.
7 brewing, and then you smell the lid of the gaiwan, and you're supposed to still smell it.
Yeah.
And then the nice brew, you can still taste the aftertaste, and then it means it's a good tea.
Right.
然后我会像是这样。
Can you slurp? I can't do that. A, I can't do it, and B, I can't do it with a really hot cup of tea. I can't hold it even.
那这个是第4道。
It tastes of tea, real tea, but it smells of flowers, and it smells like a real living thing, even though it is, you know, half a black tea. Being up here in the mountains, and I've seen how they grow the tea and how they pluck it and the care with which they process it, all these little hand processes, and they treat it like a very rare and precious commodity, and they drink it with great ceremony. And all the days I've been in China, I've seen everybody drink their tea in that same way, and they make a ritual of it, even though it's just an everyday thing. And it is a world away from how we treat our tea. We buy it in big, cheap boxes, we buy as many tea bags as we can, we just prod it with a spoon, we chuck it away. But here, they make an everyday thing something special. And I'm rather inspired now, making a cuppa for me and my friends, to make it their way. So I'm going to do what they do, which is you heat up the little jug and you heat up the little pot. You put these leaves in, which I think will be oolong leaves. It's about perfection. So that even in an anonymous hotel bedroom, you're in touch with your culture. Or there is a box with 2 sachets of mellow birds, so, you know, whichever you want. Of Of course, we do love our tea in Britain. It's just not our way to make a song and dance about it. Forget West End musicals and overpriced moth-eaten seats and the leading lady off with a cold. This is a spectacular musical, choreographed by the man who directed the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics. It's called Impressions of Da Hong Pao, based on the legend of Red Robe Tea. There's about 600 people on stage. The arena, a 2,000-seater, it revolves. They light up the actual mountains in the distance. Honestly, it's enough to make you vote communist.
It's all about tea. They're tossing the tea.
And most extraordinary, at the end, they come out with a teapot and cups, and everybody in the audience gets a hot cup of Red Robe tea poured out for you in front of your very eyes.
So you don't get that at the end of Billy Elliot.
That fantastic show tells the story of how tea brings people together. But away from legend, tea has driven nations apart. Britain and China both loved tea. They had it, we wanted it. They let us buy it, but they didn't want us finding out how it grew. Apart from the odd pigtail disguised plant hunter, our traders were kept corralled on the coast, well away from Wu Yi. Any locals caught helping the British to travel inland or to learn the language risked death. It's hard to believe when you look at how cities like Shanghai have embraced Western commercialism, but back then they had no interest in doing business with us. We needed them, they didn't need us.
The problem was the Chinese didn't really want anything we had to offer. They didn't want our cotton, they didn't want our pianos, and strangely, they didn't want our knives and forks. But we did have one thing that they wanted. It was grown 1,500 miles away, and they were mad for it.
Our determination to get as much tea as we wanted was about to turn Victorian Britain into the biggest drugs dealer in history. This is opium, like tea, very sought after and even more addictive. It was grown by tribes on the borders of India, which at that time belonged to the British. It was bought by the East India Company and then smuggled into China, up to 40,000 chests a year. The money we made from the opium meant we didn't have to use our precious silver reserves to pay for our tea. Professor John Wong is a historian with a specialist knowledge of the opium wars.
The tea trade was interlocked with the opium trade, and these two together, one might say, was the foundation of the British Empire.
It's all based on addiction, our addiction to tea.
Yes, British addiction to tea, and then Chinese addiction to opium.
And what effect did opium have on Chinese society when it flooded in?
Devastating.
Yeah.
When you are craving for the drug, you can't think.
Yeah.
And after taking the drug, you are so up in the skies, you can't work. So from top to bottom in Chinese society, people smoked. It was entirely rotten.
Right.
And it was a huge problem.
The Emperor of China tried to stop the opium trade, but we had a superior naval force and firepower. We really did rule the waves. So the British Navy sailed into Shanghai up the Yangtze River and blockaded the Grand Canal, and China capitulated. We'd shown the foreigners a thing or two, we'd got Hong Kong on a long lease, and we'd got the tea. Result?
Opium had solved our problems. By the 19th century, it was the single biggest commodity traded in the world. And as the opium flooded into China, the tea came pouring out.
This was the golden age of the tea clipper. Slim, sleek ships designed to bring commodities into dock in the fastest time. The first tea back would command the highest price. They would race each other from Shanghai and Canton round the Cape of Good Hope en route to Britain. This twist of the tea story brings me back to London, which by the early 19th century had become the centre of the international tea trade. And with the speeds of the racing ships reported in the daily papers, people in sight of the Thames were in a lather of anticipation.
Tea's a very ordinary thing, isn't it? We don't get very excited about it. I'm certainly less than excited about this. But in the mid-19th century, people got really excited about it. They used to stand on the sides of the docks waiting for the ships to come in, looking out to where they thought China was, going, the tea's coming, woohoo! Reaching speeds of up to 17 knots, clippers like the Cutty Sark could bring home the tea in under 100 days, which was good because Britain by then was very, very thirsty. Between 1801 and 1911, the population of Britain quadrupled, but the amount of tea we drank increased 12-fold, which, if you don't have O-level maths, which I don't, it means people are drinking a lot more tea. That's all you really need to know. Tea was taking over, and rather like the Chinese with their opium, we were pretty much hooked, as I found out from historian Amanda Vickery.
It's one of the first extra-European drugs that really captures the British imagination. I suppose the one before would be tobacco, but if you think about what are those great exotic groceries, they'd be tobacco, sugar, coffee, and tea. And tea is the one that really, really takes for the British.
It wasn't just the tea from China the aristos loved, it was the china from China that they coveted as well. Chinoiserie was so in, totes popular.
There was a craze for everything Chinese. The porcelain was coming in on the ships with the tea, and they were just in love with the whole look. And a lot of stately homes had a Chinese room with all this lovely porcelain.
But by the 19th century, tea had poured down from the upper echelons, and now we were all at it. The plebs had hold of the teapot. Food historian Clarissa Dixon Wright says it was transforming the country.
I think it was very important, and certainly by Victorian Edwardian era, everybody was drinking tea, and they were drinking it in the factories. So I think enormously important. It probably led us to rule the world.
We'll see how tea helped make Britain great, but for now we had a problem. Everyone was drinking more and more tea, but we didn't really like having to deal with the Chinese to get it. They were foreign, they didn't wear proper trousers, we needed to get it from somewhere else. So although we'd thrashed the Chinese in round one, we couldn't be sure they would play the game. And tea was now too popular to risk them taking their teapot home, so to speak. We had to have our own tea. Let's think. Can't grow it in England, not till we get global warming. I know, let's go to one of our other countries that we own. One of the hot ones.
I've come to the very northeast corner of what used to be British India, and this is where the British found the solution to their tea problem.
Somehow the Opium Wars had left relations between China and Britain a little bit strained, but India was British, so no problems there. Which bit of India? Let's think. Assam.
Assam was the perfect place to grow tea. It's really fertile, it has a really gentle undulating landscape, and it has tons of rain.
We're in the middle of the rainforest in monsoon season. We're staying in this little eco-lodge. We had dinner by candlelight because there was no power. I had a bat in my bedroom all night. Luckily, didn't find that out till the morning. I'm having a lovely time. We don't question now that tea comes from India, but for centuries, a bit like the two old ladies locked in the lavatory, nobody knew it was there. That's nice, isn't it? Elephant pulling over. Let us overtake. To find out how we did discover it, I'm going to meet an ancient tribe called the Singpho. They'd already played a big part in our tea story by helping supply the opium that we smuggled into China. In fact, they still smoke opium today. Boots off when you go into an opium den, thank you.
So this gentleman's chopping up fresh banana leaves, and then they're drying them on that sort of lacrosse rackety thing there over the flames, and then that gets mixed with the opium, and that's what you need to do before you can smoke it, I think.
As with many addictions, as with tea, it's the ritual that becomes as important as the drug.
Thank you very much.
And the accoutrements. Instead of the tea strainer and the cake stand, they've got the banana leaves and the crucible. But they drink tea with their opium, made by the ladies, obviously. The men are busy with the drug faffing. And it was the tea, when the British first came to Assam, that they were interested in.
We weren't sure at first if it was tea. It didn't taste like the stuff from China. It was from a leaf the Singpho called falap. It grew very tall and they used elephants to harvest it. Was it tea? Was it not tea? This is how the Singpho used to harvest their bushes. They would just let them grow and then they go around an elephant, machete the branches off and somebody else picks them up. I love elephants. I do love elephants and this is wonderful to see them so near. They're just a wonderful part of nature. And we don't usually get the chance to see them. You know, I rode on an elephant when I was about 4, which you could do in the 50s at Bellevue Zoo in Manchester. It's nice to see them just doing what they do. Like getting really cross and trampling about angrily. Baby's caused a lot of trouble. I think it just wanted to galump for bail, but a baby elephant galumphing is a lot more frightening than you might think. I was frightened. Once the leaves were harvested, the poor baffled British tea detectives were no wiser when they saw the next part of the process. I should say that they're not normally dressed like this. They put on their ceremonial costumes as a welcome to us. And I put on my ceremonial fleece. And I hope they appreciate it. There's something we haven't talked about. There's an elephant in the room. No, there is. An elephant in the room. It's funny to be in a room that goes dark and you realise it's gone dark because there's an elephant in a doorway. Not a thing you get much in Muswell Hill. So the Singpho would dry the falap on the fire and then pack these unidentified leaves into bamboo shoots for roasting. All very intriguing, and one person in particular wanted to know more. In 1823, a Scottish soldier called Robert Bruce visited this area, was invited in by the then king for a drink, was given a drink, was very intrigued by its flavour and asked what plant it had come from. What Bruce wanted to know was it tea? From the taste, it was hard to tell. It's really bitter, very strong. Tiny. They could get used to it then. The Singpho seeds eventually ended up here at India's Botanical Gardens, where plants from all over the world would be sent to see if they could be grown in British, in the sense of Indian, soil. You remember Robert Fortune, pigtail Chiswick plant hunter? His tea leaves from China had also been smuggled back here. This is where the first tea seeds were brought from China, and they were planted over there because the British were desperate to find tea that they could grow themselves in India. What they didn't know was it was already here. It was 10 years before experts here decided those Singpho leaves from Assam were really tea. Assam leaves look very different from Chinese leaves. But eventually they all agreed Camellia sinensis variety Assamica was a true tea. Yes, finally, we could grow our own proper tea, what British people would like, in a country where people had to do what we said. Cue the music. Within 20 years of the confirmation that the Assam plant was tea, more than 50 tea gardens had sprung up. I'm visiting the very first one. This is the Chibua Tea Estate, which is the oldest tea estate in India. It began in 1836. Chibua is cha for tea and bua for planting. This is the tea plantation. These huge estates like Chibua signalled the way forward for a new kind of tea production. Won't fit, I've got a huge head. Chinese tea culture was very sophisticated, but its cultivation methods were pre-industrial and small-scale. Tea in British India would be cultivated the British way. We weren't actually going to pick it ourselves, obviously. The local chaps could do that, but we would be in charge, using modern, efficient methods learnt from the Industrial Revolution. I wish you could smell the smell. The smell is absolutely intoxicating. So the tea's been squished, I don't want to get too technical, and tumbled, and now it's going along here, and in this process you can see it's already what they call coppery, I call brown. So it's gone from green to brown just in these processes.
At Chubwa, tea would be produced to order, millions of leaves plucked, processed and packed, all whizzing their way home to the tea tables of Britain. With mass-produced tea growing safely within the British Empire, and with good old British Empire cheap sugar to take some of the taste away, tea could make the leap from top-drawer delicacy to mass-market necessity. Hot, sweet, milky, affordable, lovely.
Smells like tea. It's still damp, but it looks like tea, you've got to admit. And that's what goes in the tea bags. I was going to say, it's not the sweepings off the floor, except they have just swept it off the floor, but that's because it fell on the floor, not because it's the sweepings.
We had applied the principles of science and technology to the production of tea, but there was one process that couldn't be mechanised. Even today, the plucking is mostly done by hand and mostly done by women.
How young are they when they start?
18 years,
Right.
plus they have to be
And do you have a retirement age?
58.
58?
Yeah.
I'm too old to do it then. Sorry, no plucking. Plucking's off.
In spite of my great age of 59, I'll give it a go. How dangerous can it be?
I sometimes think, well, you know, was that 2 leaves in a bud? Was it 1 leaf in a bud? Or was it 3 leaves in a bud? So, you know, it's making me very anxious, actually. I'm trying to keep cool, but I don't want to ruin the whole next batch of tea by the wrong plucking. She's taken everything, there's nothing left now. We need to move on. Need to go to another bush. Give us the other hand. Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Oh, sorry, I'm all right.
Yes, I am, actually.
Where was I? Oh yes, in an irrigation ditch. The British dug miles of ditches as they created these tea gardens out of raw jungle. We didn't dig them ourselves, obviously. As I said, we had chaps to do that for us. They were very happy working all hours for low pay in terrible conditions. And it wasn't easy for us either. There's not even a cushion on that chair. He had to pay out all those low wages before he could go home and have a drink on the veranda.
We've got many lovely words from India. Pyjamas, kazi, one of my favourites, and bungalow. That is a classic bungalow. And you'll see these all over the British Empire, and that's a planter's bungalow, and it's built on stilts. And that was for many reasons. That was because they thought malaria germs came up from the swampy water underneath, so it was to get them raised up above that. They had a big open veranda where they could sit and get drunk. And also, if they were getting on an elephant, because they weren't Indian and they didn't know how to climb up an elephant's trunk, the elephant could come alongside the veranda and the British man could just step on and go off and kill something.
With his gin and tonic, tiger hunts and tiffin, the tea planter would come to occupy a unique place in the British psyche. Half admirable and half not.
I'm home.
Tarquin!
Surprised?
I thought you'd be away working on the tea plantation for at least another 2 days.
Good Lord, no. These are modern days, you know. That quick brew grows in no time at all.
Tea planting in Assam in the early days was a very tough job. You had to be physically and mentally very resilient. But in a post-colonial era, the tea planter went from being a rather heroic romantic type to a stock comic character.
Tarquin, there's something I must tell you. I have fallen in love with another man, a very successful tea planter.
What? You brazen doxy. What was the attraction, eh? Bigger perforations?
It's great to be actually standing in a real planter's bungalow. Now this has been done up, but it is very old. It's 160 years old this year. Or if you're watching the repeat, it's 161 years old. Or if you're watching this on UK Gold, it's probably fallen down by now. So it's been done up, but you can still get a sense of the scale of the rooms, and they're very light, it's very airy. It's been done up in a style I would say was sort of 1950s Chorlton. Reminds me a bit of my grandmother's house in the decor and the flowery curtains. It's lovely, it must have been a very nice place to live. It's just the alcoholism and the tiger shooting I wouldn't really fancy.
And if it was a tough life for the planters, in some ways it must have been even harder for the Mem Sahibs who came with them.
As more and more men who couldn't get work in England came out to work in India, more and more ladies who couldn't get husbands in England came out to get married in India. And of course it was a terrible culture shock for them. This strange land, languages they didn't understand, people they absolutely didn't understand and didn't want to understand and just saw as a complete alien race. So there was a very handy book compiled for the Memsahibs of India called The Complete Indian Housekeeper and Cook, which gave you advice as to how to run your house in the British way and teach your servants to be British. But this was their attitude to the Indian people who were working for them. The Indian servant is a child in everything except age and should be treated as a child, that is to say kindly but with the greatest firmness. But actually, when you get past that attitude, which is the underlying attitude of the whole book, it is full of very sensible advice of where to buy everything, how to preserve your furniture, how to stop everything rotting in the endless monsoons. But the best bit of advice I took from it was if you want to get a bit of fluff off your jacket, you get a chapati and you open it up till you get the doughy bit and you make a ball. Dandruff, fluff, everything sorted. By 1888, so really in just over 50 years, from a standing start, India had overtaken China as our main supplier of tea. And copying from the British they were working alongside, the Indians started to drink tea themselves. Though that's only happened since about the 1920s. Now it's their national drink, but as at any motorway services, you're not going to always get it exactly how you like it. We've just stopped for a cup of tea, and we've ordered tea, and this is what we've got. I'll just show you what the... Can you see the spoon? Now that is something you would associate with cocoa, so this is like the cocoa version of tea. It comes with loads of sugar and condensed milk. It's really treacly. And this is what soldiers used to drink, British soldiers used to drink in the First World War. Well, I suppose, you know, compared with drowning in a shell hole, it was a big treat, but for those of us of a modern age, it's not doing it. From Assam, tea spread across India to Kerala in the south, Darjeeling in the north, and of course to the island of Sri Lanka. But if you're looking for an Indian city that lives, breathes and drinks tea, we have to go to Kolkata. Showing me round is Sangeeta Kishlu. She's a planter's daughter. Please note the lack of resemblance to Les Dawson. She's been in the tea business for more than 30 years. Well, all her life. Sangeeta, why do you think of all the leaves and all the bushes in the world, tea is the leaf that everybody chooses to make their drink out of?
Well, tea calms you, it energizes you. It's a pick-me-up drink. Each cup of tea I drink for different reasons.
Yes.
In the morning, it starts my day.
Yeah.
Mid-morning, it kills my hunger. In the evening, it calms me after a hard day's work.
Yeah.
Like the poor man on the street. You know, it's a beverage that can be had on the go. It's a beverage for all occasions, for all times, for all seasons.
Although mass-market tea came to India via the British, it's now completely absorbed into their own culture. Today is the festival of Vishwakarma, the Hindu god of engineers and machinery. So today, in this tea bag factory, the workers get a big feast, then the priest will bless them, and then he blesses all the tea bag machines. And that's to help ensure a safe, breakdown-free year ahead, hopefully. So what's actually happening now? He's blessing.
He's just performed the puja at the god. Basically, he's bringing the god to the machine.
Right.
By putting the symbol on, he's now ensured that this machine has the blessings of the god. If you do not do this puja well, there is a superstition that the chances of accidents are very high.
I tell you what was really nice about that was that we had to do it a few times for the camera, the blessing of the machines, and each time they did it absolutely sincerely. And the gentleman that was showing me around, he said he didn't mind how many times they did it because that meant extra blessing for the machines. And the more blessing the machines get, the better their safety record. And I was very chuffed with that. When the festival is over, and those tea bag machines should be good to go for another year, and they will get regular maintenance as well, please don't write in, They take the icons down to the banks of the Hooghly at dusk and throw them in the river. I think they're not supposed to because they're trying to keep the river clean, but they just seem to do it anyway. Kolkata is heaving with tea stalls, and there's one down here on the riverbank that's supposed to be a bit of a cut above.
This is Sadhu, and this is his stall. He's a chaiwala. His family have been making tea here on the banks of the Hooghly for 80 years. He's been doing it himself for 20 years. And he's making special tea with milk and cardamom seeds and rose water. And it's very spectacular, and I'm going to have one.
I was ready for a merry debate about whether the milk should go in first, but quite frankly, it seems like the whole thing is milk. There's a bit of tea, oh, and some very fancy extras. Apart from being slightly apprehensive about the pan, can't help thinking a bit of Brillo wouldn't come amiss, that's just my English narrow-mindedness. The whole thing is so different from ordering a British cuppa. It's literally a world away from being given a cardboard cup full of not quite boiling water with a tea bag and a stick to try and fish it out with.
When my father used to drink tea when I was very small, he used to hold the teapot up quite high. He said it brought out the flavour. But looking at this, there's not really a huge comparison. It's like hot milk, really. I'm sorry not to be, more analytical. That's a sort of sweet mint. I'm not getting any tea yet. I'm going to persevere. It's really lovely. It's really nice. Thank you very much. You might need to think about doing a skinny version. Thank you very much. It's beautiful. Thanks a lot.
And if you thought that looked a bit colonial and careless, me chucking my teacup on the ground, that's what they do here. Plastic cups are out, and all the tea from the chai stalls is served in these little terracotta cups. The tea industry is big business in this part of India, employing nearly 2 million people. And down these back streets are the potters who are in their tiny workshops making the cups, literally slaving over a hot stove.
So they're making the cups that the chaiwalas use in the tea stalls, and they're making them out of the mud that comes from the Ganges. And these gents are making the teacups. All day and all night they work. It's absolutely boiling hot in here, and I think it's the kiln. It smells of anthracite. It's a smell from my childhood. But they do have the telly. It looks like Crossroads, what they're watching. I can't be absolutely sure. It does look like the Calcutta version.
These men are living away from home and their families, working day and night to send money back to their villages. It's a very hard way of life, but it's to their advantage that every cup will only be used once.
And then when people have had a cup of tea, they smash it on the ground, and that eventually turns back into mud and goes back into the river. So it's very ecologically sound, the whole thing.
Tea is such an all-consuming and visible passion in India that I'm still surprised they didn't drink it before the British came. Mind you, having tasted the bitter brew of the Singphos and the condensed milk version they seem to prefer now, you can understand why steaming leaves in bamboo pipes never really caught on. So the British did do something good, didn't we? Please say we did.
Whatever Calcutta is today is whatever the British left behind. And for us, for the tea industry, we're indebted because we're still functioning on that framework, We're still using the same machines, we're still using the same methods of sale. So the tea industry owes a lot to the British.
There are remnants of the British presence everywhere in Kolkata, but one of the biggest reminders of our legacy is tea itself.
Thank you.
In the boardroom of one of Kolkata's top tea merchants, J. Thomas, you'll spot that's not an Indian name, they've got records and photographs going back to the days of the Raj.
There's even a rare sighting of 2 pith helmets, which you might think was just from terrible old novels, and obviously they actually wore them.
Downstairs, the tasting room hasn't changed much since colonial times. Here, teas from all over India are tasted and analysed the traditional way. And what's becoming very familiar is the passion and pride people who work in tea in China and India feel for the product they work with.
There's so much care, attention and passion that goes into producing these teas. Each of these individual gardens are run by proud men. Why don't you taste,
Which
Jorya?
one shall I taste?
Anyone you like.
Okay,
Okay?
so slurp.
Do what you will. A silent appreciation, is it? And then you taste this one.
Okay.
Fair enough.
That tasted stronger
Yes.
and more bitter,
Yes.
and that tasted sweeter and lighter.
That's wonderful. Would you like a job?
Yes, I would, but not here. Some of the tea they taste here will end up in Britain, but most Assam and Darjeeling tea is brokered through Kolkata. They taste it, then set the price. This is a tea auction. Now, I don't have any experience of auctions apart from flog it. I think this will be different because probably they're selling something that people actually want to buy. So, I'm going to go in.
What's he shouting about? Yeah, because the person who shouts first, his bid gets picked up as soon as the hammer goes down.
They've been holding tea auctions here for 150 years, and in the old days they could be quite raucous. But today more and more tea is auctioned online, and in any case India is no longer one of the big exporters. They have such a big domestic market. We taught them to drink it, and now they're drinking it. Well, older people are.
The younger generation, they find tea fadi-dadi. So richer people tend to migrate to maybe wine or fizzy beverages or carbonated drinks.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge that we face in the future.
Tea's facing a similar challenge in Britain, as we'll see. And in a changing world, India is now just one of many tea-growing countries. Kenya exports more, and we don't own that now either. But there is a tea estate in Cornwall, so we might yet get back in the game. And even in China, the first port of call on our tea journey, there seems to be a little crack in that old wall of respect for the leaf. It was the British passion for tea that helped drag China forcibly into the modern world. But as with India, the young are preferring the coffee shop to the ancient ritual. But my money's on tea. It's a survivor. What a journey I've been on with tea. I've been up rivers, down mountains, across continents. And I still find it extraordinary to think that it's 2 leaves and a bud and hot water, and that's made a drink that's conquered the world. And my journey's not over, because now I want to know how tea conquered, seduced and enslaved the British.
As soon as you can start work, a cup of tea, and then you have a break, you have a cup of tea, and then you have a lunch break, you have a cup of tea, and then there's normally like an odd one squeezed in.
Earl Grey is not Chinese. Blimey, it is.
Well done, tight, everybody. Okay. I'm going to explore tea's unique contribution to the British way of life.
The 3 things that we needed to get through the war were food, fuel and tea.
I'm coming round your way.
Oh, without the tea, we would have lost the war.
And why it's only us that can make a really nice cup of tea.
Have you tasted the tea in America?
Terrible.
And is it the only beverage to link revolution, spitting and chimps?
Green, Mr. Shifter, like refreshment.
Thank you most kindly, madam.
These are the best ads ever.
It's the most successful advertising company.
One way of shifting it.
How did this strange exotic leaf become, got to say it, our cup of tea? So next time you'll see about the British love affair with tea. Well, it's not really love affair. It's more of a dull marriage. Oh, you'll see what I mean. Has there ever been a drink that's meant more to the British than tea?
As soon as you can start work, a cup of tea, and then you have a break, you have a cup of tea.
A good hot cup of tea worked wonders.
And it doesn't get more English than tea.
But tea's not English. It's not even British. We've seen that we had to travel halfway across the globe to get hold of Camellia sinensis.
We had to wage wars and smuggle drugs and find a country where we could grow it, all for the sake of getting our daily cuppa.
Probably led us to rule the world.
Okay. Now I want to find out why.
To be without tea was to be without life, you know.
How has it come to mean so much to us, this little exotic leaf?
It can console you, there's the warmth and the ritual, and you can share it.
Tea is a social drink. You make a cup of coffee. You make a pot of tea.
Why has our nation been so obsessed with tea for so long?
One day I decided to try to have a complete day without tea, and I was quite shaken. I was quite disturbed.
And why can nobody else in the world make tea properly?
Have you tasted the tea in America? Terrible.
What I'm trying to find out is why we in particular have such a bizarre relationship with it. Why do we feel the need to advertise it with chimps in bowler hats, use the dregs to read our fortunes? And why do we have this persistent belief that it was the tea leaf that won us the war? Anyway, come with me, people, and we will find out. We think of ourselves as a nation of tea drinkers. I bought some Jubilee kitchen roll last year. If I bought it this year, it would have been cheaper. And the symbols on it were a crown, a Union flag, an umbrella, and a teapot. And my quest with this programme is to find out how British people really feel about tea and get them to articulate it. But it's very difficult. It's like asking people what they feel about the back of their neck or their mattress. I mean, I do know that we love tea, we love it. It's just that we're never going to be able, really, to look tea in the face and say so. Like a reliable, dull old partner, tea is always there, hovering in the background. Tea helps any social occasion, like my date with reclusive and seldom seen Graham Norton.
Well, hey, come on, that's it. Put the kettle on.
And Betty's not wrong.
No.
Put the kettle on.
Yeah.
Solves all.
A nice cup of tea.
See, a nice
There we
cup of tea. It's never just a cup of tea. It's a nice
It's a nice cup of tea. I know. I don't know why it's a nice cup of tea. We all keep saying that. I suppose the nice cup of tea is to give you that warm. So it's not just a drink.
It's a warm thing you've made them.
Yes, you've made them a warm thing. Yes. Because we're not good at talking in this country, so perhaps it's a substitute.
Yes.
For therapy.
Tea is a social drink because coffee, it seems to me, you make a cup of coffee. You make a pot of tea.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a gathering. And my mother takes this seriously.
Does she?
Yeah, like when we go on holiday, it's all she can talk about. The whole holiday.
What, whether she's going to get a cup of tea or not?
And what it'll be like.
Well, it'll be rubbish.
No,
we
they
know
order tea, and then it comes. Me and her and my aunt Christine, I took them on a cruise, and that was their holiday essentially. Was
tea.
ordering tea and then complaining about the tea that
Yeah.
you knew you wouldn't like.
No, you're not
so
gonna
why
like
did
it,
you order
no.
it?
Yeah.
But then they found some Russian waiter who knew to boil the water properly.
Well,
they loved him
because they drink tea in
Yes,
Russia. You see.
so they would hunt him down like a dog. Yeah. There he is! There he is! And he'd get this nice tea.
Anyway, if you were me
Yeah.
and you were making a programme, a documentary about tea, where would you go?
Probably Harrogate.
I'm sorry, that was a set-up question and answer. I needed someone to say Harrogate, and Graham was there. Don't blame Graham. Drinking tea, looking out the window. This whole gamut of actions happening here. But as exciting as it is looking out onto a Yorkshire pavement, I'm on a fearless fact-finding flipping mission. What makes a good cup of tea? Susie Garriger knows. She's a tea taster for Tailors of Yorkshire. She's one of around 80 tea tasters in Britain.
Thick, 4.3.
You'd think slurping and spitting would come easily to a comedian. Not so.
I think you suck it in sort of behind your teeth, so teeth forward and suck it behind your teeth.
Crikey. I don't know, something's inhibiting me. I'm stopping like 75% of the way through.
Very good, much better.
Obviously the thing is to stand on your tiptoes, that's the deciding factor. The slurping is to get the tea round all the different parts of the tongue. And the spitting out, that's obvious. If you drank all that tea all day, you'd never be there. You're a heck of a spitter.
Not the most glamorous jobs I know.
There's a whole tea tasting vocabulary, just like in comedy. They have descriptions like malty, brisk, kelpie, whereas in comedy we have not funny.
That was a good slurp.
I would call that bouncy. That's
Bouncy, there's a new tea terminology, great.
Susie has to be able to accurately describe each flavour.
So a Sam, nice thick guttiness. It's a really good description with that. I like that. Gutty teas. It means it's thick, it's rich, it gives you a bit of a kick.
The tea most of us drink in the UK is a blend of tea from lots of different teas from lots of different countries, Kenya, India, and it's Susie's job to choose from all those different flavours, which vary from harvest to harvest, so each new blend gives us the old taste we expect.
Tea is indigenous from China, but it now grows in over 40 different countries. And that's great for us because, I mean, all those different countries have different qualities that we blend together.
All the tea Susie tastes will be made from a standardised ratio of tea to water and milk. We don't need to bother with that in our own homes, or even get dressed, but she does have one handy tip.
Freshly boiled water, and this is really important for when you're drinking tea at home as well, because freshly boiled water has the right amount of oxygen in the water. If you overboil the water,
got no oxygen.
Exactly, and you're going to get a really flat tasting cup of tea.
And you'll never be happy in your whole life.
Because happiness is good tea.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm not a good slurper. Can we just leave it there? Let's get to grips with the history. It's very rare in this country for a fashion to start with the lower classes and work its way up. In fact, I can only think of tracksuit bottoms and call the midwife. And tea started at the top. It took a posh foreigner to kick off the whole addiction. It was Catherine de Braganza who came over from Portugal in 1662 to marry Charles II. She already had the tea drinking habit. She brought with her a tea caddy, and instantly tea was all the go with the upper classes. We're very free and easy with tea now. Any old pleb can drink it, but back then it was the preserve of the super rich. Woburn Abbey is the ancestral home of the Duke and Duchess of Bedford. When tea first began to trickle into the country, dukes and duchesses would have been among the few people who could actually afford it. We've seen how far tea had to come from high up in the Chinese mountains, down those long rivers to be loaded on the ships, to make that hazardous voyage back to the London docks, so any tea that arrived safely was hugely expensive. So this is the oldest receipt they have in the house for tea, and this is from 1685. And they spent 24 shillings on a pound of tea, which is approximately the equivalent of £100. So they're spending £100 on 1 pound of tea, which just shows you that would have been way out of most people's league and ability to pay.
This strainer actually...
The strainer doesn't go with these cups.
No, the strainer doesn't go with these cups.
I've just popped into Woburn to have a cuppa with the present Duchess. It was that or Toddington services.
Is this Earl Grey? This is Earl Grey, but they would have had Lapsang most probably.
Yes, yeah. So the time we're talking about, tea was a luxury item, wasn't it? Because it was so very expensive, wasn't it? So that's why you have tea caddies and things are locked up and kept away.
I think it was expensive, and I know that they'd send somebody out to bring it back from the docks. The family did own some docks at Rotherhithe.
Well, that's very handy.
And as they owned most of Covent Garden, they did they used to use those shops and the dealers all in Covent Garden.
Would it have been that the men stayed behind at the table?
Drinking port and smoking cigars. And the ladies most probably would have come in here and drank tea and gossiped.
And that is how my life came to be saved by a haggis.
Please. And soon every novel had a tea table scene. Jane Austen, the Brontes, they could all use the tea table as a setting for revelations and high drama.
And pray take care of your nose, my dear. I prefer not to find a septum amongst the tea things.
And unlike horse riding or fencing, drinking tea for an actor requires no special training. In the 19th century, the 7th Duchess of Bedford, Anna Maria, had a very significant part to play in our tea story, which I will come to shortly, but for now, have a look at her very upmarket lunchbox.
This is a travelling tea service that Anna Maria would have travelled with.
So she could always be sure of having her own tea, out of her own tea cups with her own kettle.
We'll have a look at her. This would have been my cup and saucer.
Oh, is this the sort of saucer that they used to drink tea out of? I've never seen one of those sort of saucers. So they'd pour their tea into them and slurp and to cool it down. And that's why they used to say it was a dish of tea, didn't they? They used to say, take a dish of tea, and that's a dish.
And that's would have been a
I'm
dish.
really pleased to have seen that.
And then the tea caddy where the tea would have been kept. And
Yes.
Oh, excuse my fingers. But it was locked.
Yes, because it was so
Because
expensive.
the tea was so expensive. And the bell for when I guess you wanted her tea. Or some more tea. I feel like I'm on the Antiques Roadshow.
Yeah, so do I.
Do you? I couldn't put a value on it, though.
We didn't take any persuading to take up the tea habit. There was no hanging back like there was with olive oil or pesto. Catherine de Braganza tipped up with just 2 ounces in her tea caddy in 1662. By the 1720s, we were importing more than £1 million of tea a year. But it didn't happen without a fight. You wouldn't think of something as cosy as tea causing a moral panic, but it did. As tea seeped through the social strata, the upper classes got very exercised. A man called Jonas Hamway, he was writing in the 1750s. He was famous because he was the first person in London to carry an umbrella, which is quite a sight, and they used to call them portable roofs. And they used to think if he was so worried about getting wet, he should get in a cab. And like we would say to people, get a room, they'd shout to him, get a cab. He thought tea was very, very bad for you, that it made your teeth black, it made you melancholic, that nurses were letting their babies fall out of windows because they were so busy sipping tea. And the father of Methodism, John Wesley, he said tea brought you near the chambers of death. But later on, he changed his mind. What Wesley realised was that you couldn't make much of a case for the dangers of tea when there were huge social problems caused by the drinking of beer and cheap gin. It was the drunks you had to watch out for with the baby dropping, not the tea drinkers. The temperance movement had right on its side, but you can't advocate abstinence from alcohol without offering an alternative. Now we could drink tea not just for pleasure, but as a moral duty. I'll just use this small sieve.
The elegance of your tea table astonishes
It's like Woburn all over again.
Yeah.
Food historian and tea lover Clarissa Dixon Wright is living proof of tea's sobering influence.
So why were people in such a lather about tea? Why were they so exercised about it?
Because it was the latest fashionable thing, and therefore should be reserved for the rich and the gentry and whatever.
Yes.
And then, of course, I mean, it went on to be the saving of the nation. And suddenly, by Victorian, Edwardian era, everybody was drinking tea, and they were drinking it in the factories, and it probably led us to rule the world.
You drink a lot of tea yourself?
I drink quite a lot of tea.
What sort do you like?
Assam in the morning, and then in the afternoon I like either Darjeeling or some afternoon blend. So I drink about, 4 or 5 cups at least a day.
You don't drink alcohol, do you?
No, not for the last, God knows how many years,
So
25 years.
When you were getting sober, was tea a useful thing for you?
It was the making of tea that was useful rather than the drinking of it.
The activity.
Because, you know, by the time you warmed the pot and the kettle's boiled and everything, you know, the cravings moved on. I don't think it was a substitute for going to Alcoholics Anonymous, really. But the one thing you do get in AA meetings is a very good cup of tea.
So no more gin-sodden mothers chucking the baby out with the bathwater. The kettle was on. Boiling the water killed the germs, the caffeine kept us going, and Britain became great. We would have drunk it with the germs. We just liked the taste. It didn't really matter what posh people were saying about tea because the lower orders just carried on drinking it anyway. And we do. We drink 160 million cups of tea a day. We're all at it. Take the London cabbie. Famously shy and retiring, reluctant to give his views on immigration or the traffic, but Pete's had a cuppa. He's ready to talk.
My tea day starts with me getting up and getting in nice and early to beat the traffic, and I've got my trusty little thermal mug there.
Well, who makes it? You make it or your wife makes it?
No, I've got to do that myself because Princess won't get up and make me a cup of tea. I'm just a modern man.
Yeah. Tea bag?
Got to be a tea bag.
Yeah.
For convenience.
Yeah.
You need it just to wind down from the stress because this town gets busier and you've got the buses and the lorries and the sirens and the cyclists. Not that I'm getting on a cyclist case, but
it keeps you calm.
And it doesn't get more English than a cup of tea.
Cabbies like Pete are lucky. They have their very own tea rooms. These green huts were built as part of the temperance movement to keep hansom cab drivers out of the pubs and give them wholesome refreshment. They used to be all over London, but now there's only 13. They're all green, they're all the length of a horse and cab, and you can only come inside if you are a cabbie or you're making a documentary.
It's nice to you.
Tracy runs this one, which is near the Albert Hall. She has all the qualifications for working in this shelter. She's really energetic, she makes a great cup of tea, and she's thin.
How much do you drink, Tracy, in a day?
About 6, 7, 8.
Yeah?
Anything.
It's good for you, though.
Cup of tea, cup of tea.
And it's the cheapest place in Royal Borough of Kensington to get a nice cup of tea.
How much is a tea?
It's 60 pence. And it's specifically for cab drivers. Nobody else can come through that door. It's hallowed door.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm all right, thank you. I don't want to be spitting toast on
Can
people.
I have your...
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And you also get used to Tracy's tea. It's got a nice colour on it.
Yeah.
It's got a nice... She knows how to put the milk in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's personal service.
If I don't have one first thing in the morning, I'll get a migraine. I won't be able to function at all.
Tea was keeping the horse and cab facing the right way, but all the workers were using the sugar and caffeine in tea to get them through the working day. There's red robe tea in China, silver tips in Darjeeling. What do we have? Builders. It doesn't even get the qualification of tea. It's just builders.
OK. Take me up the scaffolding.
For most people, builders mean strong tea with milk and sugar. We don't have the most sophisticated palates in this country, and I think tea would never have taken off in the way it did if we hadn't been able to add fat and sugar.
Paul, do you drink tea?
I do, yeah.
What sort of tea do you drink?
PG6, normally, at home.
You think of that as builder's tea?
Yeah. Strong cup of tea with 2 sugars.
All I say is it's a long day without a cup of tea, isn't it? Yeah. It's a very long day without a cup of tea.
I'm supposed to say the words herbal tea to you.
I've tasted it.
And?
I didn't like it.
Work ended when the hooter went, but the tea drinking carried on. Tea had soaked right into our social life. Even people from Lancashire had found a way to have fun with tea. I know. There's a famous seaside town called Blackpool that's noted for fresh air and fun. Some more F's, it's flipping freezing. And one thing you can do in Blackpool, apart from walking about with big foam genitalia strapped to your front, is have your tea leaves read. The Petrolengros have been reading the tea leaves on this pier for many years. Is that Tom Jones? I love Tom Jones. Of course, not everyone's as open-minded as me.
Tell us what you say. Tell me what you say. Tea leaves, Mrs. Ogden, tea leaves. It's only the map of Australia, that's all. Have you the slightest idea what the map of Australia looks like? Well, I have now, haven't I? It's in there.
Now, while I'm pouring the tea, you need to be thinking of a question.
OK.
That you want to ask.
Tarot cards, I understand. Ouija boards. But getting hard info from a wet leaf clinging to the side of a teacup, well, call me an agnostic.
Now, swill it round 3 times.
1, 2, 3.
Right, now pour it onto the saucer.
Pour the tea out onto the saucer? Yeah.
That's it. And then we have to see what we're left
what
with.
You've got. Right.
Now then. When you're reading tea leaves, you have the handle on the left-hand side.
Mm-hmm.
That bit there, the front, that's your future.
Mm.
The back is your past.
Mm.
I can see a musical note now. If you look there, can you see? It's like going down and round at the back.
I can't really see it, but then I'm not psychic, so.
It's going
I can
down
see it
there,
go down,
and
yeah.
then it's sort of coming round.
Oh, yeah,
now,
I see
to
what you
me,
mean.
that'd be a musical note.
Yeah.
Now, that's
So-
in your past.
Yeah.
So that means, of course, you're a very musical person, and you're a very creative person. At the side of it, there's a little triangle.
A little triangle? Now, to me, that's saying a Toblerone is going to come into my life, or my car might break down.
You've been thinking of living near water?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to be good for you, because water, it helps you connect with yourself spiritually, and it'll give you inner peace. At the side here, I'm seeing, it looks like a wagon, and I can see marriage for you.
Can you?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. I don't
There is a
think
wagon
so.
there.
A wagon?
Yeah, a wagon.
A marriage wagon?
Is a sign of marriage.
Is it?
But you won't end your days alone.
Thank you. Anyway, moving swiftly on from the contemplation of my last days, though if this ride should unexpectedly malfunction, I will end my days alone, as I'm one of the few people ever to be allowed on the teacups all by themselves.
Tea is an aid to meditation and a very calming ritual for the Chinese. But we don't bother with that.
We can meditate when we want to. Just look through any laundrette window. But for us, tea breaks the ice. It brings us together. It even gets us up on the dance floor. A craze for tea dances arrived in Britain with the tango in 1912. And though the smart set moved on in the 20s to cocktails, the Tower Ballroom stayed loyal to the tea dance. And nearly 100 years later, you can still come here and have a twirl and a cuppa and marvel at Phil Kelsall's mighty organ. The usual crowd. That's Mike. He proposed to Jenny from the stage last year. Luckily she did know him and said yes. And that's Bev. She's here with her son and her mum and dad and their mum and dad.
OK, Beverly, fill me in. Who's who?
Okay, so we've got my son, that's it, my son Ethan, he's 10.
Over the scones,
Peeking through the scones.
Yeah.
We've got my grandma and granddad, Patricia and Arthur.
Yeah.
And my mum and dad at the far end. So
OK, and you all come dancing?
we come 3 times a week.
Do you?
Monday, Wednesday and Friday.
Lovely. Do you have a husband, can I ask?
I do, but he doesn't dance.
No, you married
So
out.
He comes when he wants to come.
Yeah.
He sits and watches, but I'm on the floor most of the time, so he just gets bored.
Tea dances were a great way of meeting people. It was a nice, safe atmosphere. It was all quite strict in the early years. Disorderly conduct would be dealt with by expulsion, and a gentleman could only dance with a lady. Maybe gentlemen were dancing with gentlemen somewhere else in Blackpool. It's a possibility. But in the Tower Ballroom, the girls could pick and choose. Tony started coming here when he was on leave from the army.
When I started going to tea dances, there were a lot of girls free.
Looking for men.
Looking for men
Yeah.
to have a dance with, you know.
yeah.
They weren't interested in anything else.
Yeah.
It was purely simply for pleasure and social.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet you've got Tony in the builders with 2 sugars bracket. You're so wrong.
What tea do you drink?
This is cranberry tea.
Herb tea?
Yeah. This will be rather hot.
OK. So rumber and hot tea?
Yeah, yeah.
So do you drink this all day long, then, Tony?
I drink, no, I have about 4 or 5 cups. I warned you.
Just keep talking. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I warned you.
I may never sing again, but maybe that's probably not a bad thing.
No, I have it about 4 or 5 times a day.
Do you drink ordinary tea as well?
Occasionally, but
Right, you really like this?
This better, yeah. Well, it keeps me going anyway.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Tea dances took a bit of a dip in popularity in the 60s and 70s. I, for one, was distracted by treetop squash and Angel Delight. But they've had a resurgence in the last few years, as has another old tradition. OK, memory test. Remember the 7th Duchess of Bedford, Anna Maria? She of the velvet-lined travelling tea case? Well, one afternoon in 1841, it seemed to her to be a very long time till dinner.
She got this rather sinking feeling around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, we all get that.
Yeah, yes. And so started the tradition of afternoon tea.
So before that, people struggled to get from lunchtime to dinner
Well,
time?
I think maybe they did, and tea was generally drunk after dinner.
So do you think when she had her sinking feeling and had to have a piece of bread and butter and a cup of tea, do you think she realised she was starting this enormous trend?
I doubt very much she did.
Just wanted a cup of tea, really, didn't she? She wasn't to know it was going to spread out to the world. The craze for afternoon tea would soon sweep Britain. In 1884, a chain of bakery shops, the Aerated Bread Company, made a spare back room at their London Bridge branch into a tea room. They soon had 60 tea rooms, and Lyons, Express Dairy and the Cardoma chains all followed suit. Soon anyone with the price of a cup of tea could be served in clean surroundings by a uniformed waitress and get a taste of the high life. Just to clear up, afternoon tea is not to be confused with tea, a drink with jam and bread, as Julie Andrews would have it. Not that I like that line, because nobody says jam and bread, they say bread and jam, and it's not like there aren't any rhymes for jam, so no. So not to be confused with that. It's also not the same as tea, the meal, or what we're now all middle class we have to call dinner. And it's not really the same as high tea, because high tea is like afternoon tea, but later, and you have it with beans on toast. Oh, look, I'll show you. I'm on my way to Claridge's. Like many top London hotels, they've taken Anna Maria's sinking solution and given it a twist. Afternoon tea here starts at 40 quid, more with champagne, and there's a waiting list of months. I'm down in the engine room with head chef Martin.
Give your name.
It's got my initials.
Yes, just so that we don't forget your
Don't forget who I am,
Yes. The sandwiches need to marry well with tea. So cucumber, egg, chicken, ham, always a little bit of smoked salmon. So anything a little oriental or anything like that is always going to bash with the tannins in the tea. So I think it's about also having a little taste and trying your tea as well and thinking, no, that doesn't go.
Can I have a go at that one?
Yeah, please do.
How far in? That far in?
Yeah, just a little bit off the end. Perfect.
So, Martin, why do you take the crusts off?
I think if we go back to when ladies originally were taking tea, of course the crusts would have been off. And I think that little bit of refinement and that little bit of detail has gone on. I'm sure you and I love the crusts.
I love the crusts.
Yes, me too. And on
I've had
some
to restrain
bread.
myself from eating those crusts, actually. If I was on my own,
Feel
that's right.
free.
I'd have a mouthful of crusts. You know. I could never go on anything like MasterChef, but to be in Claridge's kitchen, putting hazelnuts on something I can't even pronounce, with a lot of double L's in it, such a treat. Crikey, nearly put one on upside down then. That would have gone viral on YouTube. I do find it a bit odd that girls will choose to have these posh teas rather than get legless in a bus shelter. Call me old-fashioned. Anyway, Nick's in charge of pastries. Do you think people have very high expectations now of what an afternoon tea in a top hotel will be like?
I think they've always had high expectations, but I think that afternoon tea is now so popular that they're expecting to have something, you know,
Gotta
something,
keep
something
matching it.
different and something special.
I've had to leave the kitchen. They'll have to glue their own nuts to the millfoy. I'm entertaining a young gentleman to a Claridge's special.
Earl Grey is not Chinese.
Look, it's Doctor Who.
Blimey, it is. Come on, Craig, breathe.
Actor Matt Smith shot to fame playing the 11th Doctor, and he's a big tea drinker, as is the Time Lord himself. Why do you think Doctor Who drinks tea?
I think that Doctor Who... I'm going to have some more.
Yeah.
I'm going to have some more of the Assam. I'm a bit nervous about the vanilla
Have
one.
another Assam, and when you feel you've got your strength up,
Yeah.
I'll slip you some French vanilla.
I think there's something sort of quintessentially quite British about the whole show.
Even though it's intergalactic.
Yeah.
But
You
he's
know,
British intergalactic.
yeah, blue police sort of telephone box.
Yeah.
Tweed.
So that fits with loose leaf and a tea strainer.
But I like to think that he's not that precious about... I think he, you know...
He'd
just
have a
has
tea bag.
Yeah, like a space kettle.
What do you think it says about us as a nation? That we are tea drinkers, but we also embrace the idea of being tea drinkers. Sort of boast, isn't it, that we have in the world?
Yeah, it is.
Now, why would that be?
These things sort of bed themselves in to the fabric of our society somehow, don't they? And I don't know how. I mean, if I was making a tea advert, what I think I would try to communicate about tea is that it can console you, it can start your day. There's something, there's the warmth and the ritual. And you can share it. You make someone a cup of tea and you offer it them and you give it to them, and you've got to boil the kettle, you've got to get the sugar, you've got to ask what they want, you've got to engage with them, I suppose.
Yeah.
I love the ritual of a cup of tea in the morning. Like, I love tea and a scrambled egg sandwich. Tea and a bacon sandwich, tea and a fry-up.
The tea's the whole running theme of all your meals.
Do you know, weirdly though, not weirdly, but because I had some trouble sleeping, I think just because of we were learning lines and all that and work, after 6 o'clock I started drinking decaf tea,
Right.
which my dad was appalled by.
Yeah.
I feel like a bit, I don't know.
Effeminate.
I asked my dad for a cup of decaf tea and he looked at me like I was an alien.
Well, he is an alien. Well, Doctor Who is an alien, who drinks tea and appreciates its restorative qualities.
You need rest. One more. I think he's often at his most interesting when he's doing things that are relatively human and normal, because it highlights that he's an alien somehow.
Yes.
And so I think there's something wonderful about an alien enjoying tea.
Maybe you've had enough coffee now. How about some nice, calming tea? Let's get you a cup of chamomile or something, shall we? Amy.
The tea, the tweed, the bow tie, they make him more intriguing, but the Doctor is still the star of the show. In my perfect world, the tea is the star. This isn't about you. We are giving people a cup of tea. We are giving them a pink wafer biscuit. We are giving them a sausage.
It's the tea urn. She won't boil.
Bring her over
talking? Red tables! The one in the kitchen was faulty. They could have taken her off. Hey, careful.
What we forget is that once upon a time, tea had a sort of celebrity status. Back in the 19th century, it was still something exotic and, yes, alien, and we had to go to the ends of the earth to get it. That's where those beautiful clippers came in, racing each other all the way back from China. The arrival of tea wasn't just a grocery delivery, it was an event.
You think of all these wonderful ships racing around the Cape of Good Hope to get back to London to be the first with the tea, and people following these tea races in the paper, and there was lots of publicity and lots of glamour about tea.
It was an exotic product from a country hardly any of us knew about, and historian Amanda Vickery says the fact that it could get to us so quickly added to its appeal.
What the cutty sark is all about is a sort of glamour that perhaps older viewers might associate it with the Aeneid line, you know, this sort of idea of these kind of...
Yes, they might.
I found it...
People who are in a home.
I found it glamorous. Catches tour in.
Yes.
But... So it's more this idea of speed and that you could bring back the tea harvest so quickly. It captures the public imagination.
The golden age of the tea clippers didn't last long. The Cutty Sark only made a handful of tea-bearing trips before it was seen off by the steamship and the Suez Canal. And by that time, we'd started growing our own tea on British soil, by which I mean Indian soil, and it was becoming a mass-market drink.
The Cutty Sark is associated with this kind of changeover from Chinese tea to black tea,
from India.
From Assam in particular. And one of the things that the marketeers get onto very, very quickly is the idea of the brand and the trust in things like Lipton's, Brook Bond. You get this whole kind of packaging of the working class diet, and the British start to put their trust in a label.
Tea time won't be the same without Badana.
So, as we've heard, tea was the first commodity to be packaged and branded. So you would go to a shop and instead of just asking for tea from your grocer, you would say, you know, I want Thai Fu, which is the Chinese for doctor, or because you'd seen the advert on the station platform, you might say, I want Maserati, or you might, I have my doubts, you might ask for Twinings Blue Tips at 1 and 9, which is a very strange name for tea and sounds like a below-the-waist disorder. And so tea just became one of those things, you had your own brand and you would be brand loyal. So while in one part of our empire we were happily planting tea, we were losing our grip on another part of the empire. While tea was soothing us down on these shores across the Atlantic, it was stirring us up.
Tea's a funny old drink. It's given us the teas made and the tea cosy, but it's got this dramatically blood-stained history. We never really think about it, but it's taken us to war, it's underwritten the empire, and it's even sparked a revolution.
Hear ye! Hear ye! Huzzah!
The story of the Boston Tea Party is taught to every American schoolchild. It took place nearly 250 years ago, when of course America was still British, just.
In the winter of 1773, 3 ships belonging to the East India Company sailed into Boston Harbour, loaded with tea. And that would spark one of the most iconic events in world history.
Of course, the events of that December night in 1773 were really about tax rather than tea. Americans liked tea, they drank lots of tea. What they didn't like was the threepenny tax on every pound imposed on them by the British government. And so it was here, in the Old South Meeting House, that nearly 7,000 angry Bostonians gathered, determined to stop the tea landing. No taxation without representation was their battle cry. And as historian Benjamin Karp explains, as the meeting broke up, it all kicked off.
OK, so there's a big angry crowd here. There's 3 ships in the harbour. So everybody just hightails it down to the harbour and jumps onto the ships?
Yeah, I mean, well, a huge crowd goes down to watch. And then there was a select group, maybe 100, maybe 150 men, who start swarming over the decks of these 3 ships, and they take these hundreds of crates of tea, and they chop them open and dump it all into Boston Harbour.
Dump the tea into the sea! Dump the tea into the sea!
And now, of course, the battle cry is no insurrection without a reconstruction. This is the Boston Tea Party Museum, and I think I'm going to have to pretend to throw pretend tea into the harbour in a minute.
Now, my friends, these are not mere tea chests, no. These represent something far greater. These represent a tyrant across the seas who would tell us how to lead our futures. Step right up to commit treason. 1, 2, 3, over the side, Patriots! Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
Huzzah! It's quite a dilemma, isn't it, for a British person? Should I have hung on to the tea and demanded 3 shillings and 6pence tax? That's assuming my pretend tea chest weighed £14. Not that I'm taking this too seriously.
That was a very difficult situation for me. I wanted to join in as part of the reconstruction. Felt I was, condoning the oppression of the American people. But didn't know whether to throw it in or not. I'm actually depressed now. I think I've played it all wrong.
Luckily, I was only depressed for 7 seconds because then I remembered there was a gift shop. 3 years after the tea hit the water, the Americans inexplicably embarked on the War of Independence, and within 10 years, they were no longer British, and that's the end of my interest in them. They were obviously spoiling for a fight. The tea was just an excuse, but I wonder if it all could have started over something else.
It might have been something else, but the thing about tea is that tea was so important to Americans. I mean, the Americans all want to be like Britons in the 1770s. They really loved tea, they loved what it signified, and so it was the fact that Americans loved tea so much that made this such a significant event.
Yeah, I'm out at Brooklyn. Now I'm down in Tribeca, right next to De Niro. But I'll be hood forever. I'm the new Sinatra. And since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Yeah, they love me everywhere. I used to cop it home.
There was no going back after the Tea Party. You think of old American movies, the waitress in the diner coming around with a coffee pot, Friends, Frasier. It's coffee all the way.
Actually, that's not true. Americans drink loads of tea. They're the 6th biggest consumers of tea in the world. They drink 65 billion cups a year. They just don't want you to know about it.
I don't think it's about how much tea you drink, but how much you care about it. Coffee is part of America's image and tea is part of ours, like red telephone boxes and black cabs. This is Tea and Sympathy, an old-fashioned English tea shop on the Lower West Side and an old-fashioned grocery shop next door. Both were set up by Nicky Perry, who in a previous existence was a tea lady in London.
When I first came here, I couldn't believe that you couldn't get a cup of tea, and B, all these Americans have been very disparaging about English food, which enraged me.
Yeah.
So I decided, right, I'm having myself a nice English restaurant and I'm going to show these Americans. And this is how you have a cup of tea.
Right. But what is it about tea that makes us feel so British, though? Why tea, of all things? It's just in our blood, do you think?
It's in our blood. It's ingrained in our beings. I mean, what is it when you go to somebody's house? The first thing that happens in England is the kettle goes on.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, I've had people in here looking at teapots. Can you put this in the microwave? I'm like, you going to put a teapot in the microwave? Yeah. I'm like, I'm not selling you a teapot. I'm just not. I've got a whole list on my tea list of how to make the tea American.
Yes. Yeah. Good quality tea, freshly drawn water. Yeah, we knew that. One with the pot, we knew that. 1 teaspoon of tea, 1 for the pot. Yeah. Leave for 2 to 6 minutes. You've got it all here. Yeah.
You need to. Yeah. Because I will tell you, in my opinion, the tea that you get served in most places in America tastes like somebody's leant over and put the old spoon in the Boston Harbour and then just put it in the microwave and served it to you. It's vile.
I might not say that to them.
While I'm over here, I'm going to meet someone for a cuppa, and I'm very late. I don't like to be late, and I'm actually 22 years late. I was doing a season of stand-up in London in 1990, and I had a letter from Morrissey inviting me for a cup of tea. Anyway, I couldn't go. To make amends, I brought him a tea cosy knitted by my friend Nora. I've seen Morrissey on a documentary having tea with Nancy Sinatra, and he has a plain white teapot. It's a black and white tea cosy, so it's going to look great. Oh.
Is this your own teapot?
This is mine. This travels with me. I bought it in Rome, but it's Parisian.
What sort of tea is this that we're drinking?
We are drinking Ceylon tea.
Yeah.
And it's very weak.
Yeah.
I mean, the bag skims the surface of the water and is removed. The bag, yes. I mean, I know you're a caddy person, but...
I was hoping you might come out of the caddy.
Yeah, but some of us don't remember World War II. I am, though, a teaaholic.
Yeah.
Even though I don't have very strong tea.
How often? What time do you kick off with it?
Well, as soon as I wake up, I must have tea. I think one day, because I've never had coffee, you see, but one day I decided to try to have a complete day without tea, and I was quite shaken. I was quite disturbed.
But it's interesting. We just went to see this. We went to this tea shop, Tea and Sympathy, where the whole point of it is to encapsulate Britishness, and people go and think they're having a British experience. But actually, if you went to Britain, there wouldn't be a tea shop like that.
No, but there was once.
Yes.
There was once, and it was a very British thing. And it was a very stoic thing, and it was the solution to everything. And calm you down, a nice cup of tea.
Calms you down,
I mean,
perks
nobody
you
ever
up.
said, "I'll make you a horrible cup of tea." It was always, "I'll make you a nice cup of tea." I mean, why did it have to be nice? Why not sort of make you a really raunchy cup of tea? So I think it was very British and part of the British resolve, and the reason why Hitler really couldn't get us was because of tea and nothing else. And
No, but that's so strange, isn't it? When you think it's just a hot drink. And
But it
why
isn't
Why not
really.
cocoa? Why not coffee?
why not cocoa? There's bound to be a reason.
But I'm going to give you something, but you don't have to have it.
Please
Shall I
don't
just-
say it's a tea caddy.
It's not a tea caddy. Does it look like a
A
tea
cosy
caddy?
tea
Oh, no,
cosy.
yes, it was.
See?
Forget it. It doesn't matter.
I
I'm not
know.
going to give it you now. It's all right, doesn't matter.
I knew it was a tea cosy. Come on, let's see
No,
it
no,
now.
no,
We
I
don't want to
don't want
waste
to.
further film.
No, because it's not going to match a teapot. I don't care what you say about it now.
This is a beanie hat.
It's got holes for the spout.
This is what the skateboarding kids wear. Reduced to clear, made in Morecambe.
Just give it me back. I'll give it back to Nora.
No, I will keep it, and I shall cherish it because it's...
I don't want you to.
No, it's, I'm going to use it. I just
No.
I'm going to keep it.
Okay.
In a bottom drawer.
In a bottom drawer,
in
when
a
you
back
get married.
bedroom,
Okay.
where nobody goes.
Yeah, all right.
So
Yeah.
thank you
You're welcome.
for your generosity.
You know what? I love Morrissey. And he has a point about Hitler and the British and tea. All those things that made us seem rather dull before the war. Our love of routine, our reluctance to engage in hysterics, our faith in a nice cup of tea and a sit down. In the Second World War, we were able to embrace those qualities and be proud of them. Were we downhearted? Well, probably. But never mind. Let's put the kettle on.
Always remember that day that war was declared. My wife came out to me in the garden and told me the ghastly news about the outbreak of hostilities. Never mind, my dear, I said to her. You put on the kettle. We'll have a nice cup of tea.
We're off. Hold on tight, everybody.
I've been let loose in a rainstorm, driving a naffy van near Priceless Aircraft. I've come to talk to some men and women who, unlike myself, thank you Morrissey, do remember the war.
Jeremy Clarkson, eat your heart out. Okay, yay.
Tea was so important to morale in the war that stocks were dispersed around the country to protect them from attack, and hot tea was doled out from vans like this one.
This is one of only 5 surviving nappy vans, and they went everywhere, and they were even at Dunkirk.
Tea fortified the troops on the front line, and it was there for the Blitz victims on the home front. Tea expert Henrietta Lovell recently did a special blend for the Royal Air Force, and she's going to help me recreate some genuine naffy tea.
It was absolutely important to national morale. We couldn't get through the war without tea. In fact, it was so important the government took over supply. So the 3 things that we needed to get through the war were food, fuel and tea, and they were all rationed.
Churchill knew the value of tea. They say he called it more important than ammunition. But with everything in short supply, we were going to have to improvise.
If they didn't have anything, you use one of these.
You didn't have anything. You didn't have a bed of one muslin. Of course you had a silk stocking.
You might have, wouldn't have probably used a brand new one, but you
No.
might have used an old one that you
Yeah.
had. So that was
You probably
original.
had to sleep with somebody to get it, so it does make the tea-making process a little bit longer because of sexual intercourse having to happen first. Anyway.
Or you took a piece of muslin.
Yeah.
And you take some naffy tea,
So
would
this
have
is
been
nappy
like
tea,
this.
so that's a smaller...
More industrial grade. And then we make a tea bag, which we're going to pop in. And then you want to make as much room as possible so that the tea can unfurl a little bit. You don't want to do it tightly like that.
No.
So I need your help with some string.
Yeah, I'm here.
That's my finger.
Oh, sorry. So it's the first time we had tea urns, and did we have tea urns in the First World War?
Yeah, absolutely. We're British, we can't get through life without tea.
It wasn't just the Naffy, of course. The WVS, the Red Cross, even Gracie Fields chipped in to keep Britain topped up with tannin.
I'm swooshing it about a bit. Oh my God, look at all the lovely dark colours coming off straight away.
Looks like tea.
Smells like tea. Strong
Yeah,
and
my
deep.
lord, that's practically purple.
When I made this for some pilots, they were using their big pens.
Of course they were. This looks
Oh,
like
and you know the
cocoa.
RAF man often had a moustache. They said that sometimes they didn't have time to make the tea in the urn, they just made it in the cup, and there was leaf everywhere and they couldn't strain it, and so they used their moustache to strain the tea. Or their teeth.
How on earth did we win the war?
It's probably not easy for the current generation of Facebooking smoothie sippers to get what tea meant to people fighting that war. For RAF pilots like Harry Mottershead, it was crucial.
Oh, it played a big part, let me tell you. To be without tea was to be without life, flying, you know.
Tea warmed up the sailors who were manning the Atlantic convoys, like Ray Ashby.
Tea was pretty strong. I mean, the spoon would stand up in the tin. It was that thick, you know, sometimes. Or, you know, metaphorically speaking.
And in the ration packs of soldiers like John Ainsworth on the Normandy beaches, there was always tea.
Tea is essential, and tea is also a great comfort when you're in stress and you feel as though things are not going your way. You get a nice cup of tea, it helps you to calm down, and that'll never change. Not now, I'm 91.
Knives coming.
I think this is when tea became more than a drink. It became a symbol. Somehow it combined ordinariness and courage. While physically pulling us together as we served tea or someone served us, it pulled our morale together.
I'm coming round your way, don't worry.
It gave us an identity as a nation. It was shorthand for what we were fighting for. Eva Rowland is 98, and as a young Salvation Army officer, she dished out tea for the troops.
I saw more military men than I ever thought existed.
Where were you?
I was stationed in Portland with the Royal Navy, and that was the finest experience of my life.
Really?
Believe me.
Did
yes.
you like the sailors?
Oh, what? They were grand.
Were they?
Yes.
You think tea was important?
Yes,
in that?
oh yes,
Yeah.
it was the greatest asset. A good hot cup of tea worked wonders.
Right. Cup of tea? That sounds good.
And at Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing and his team were working day and night to crack the German U-boat codes, tea again was keeping them going. Ruth Bourne was a wren working at Bletchley.
It was on a trolley, and you could hear it rattling down the corridor, and we would all shout, tea boat, and we would all run out, and we all had our own mugs.
Yes.
And it was particularly good for us in the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Flagging.
You were really flagging, yes, and then you had this wonderful cup of tea.
Is that your own mug?
This is my own mug. We all had our own mugs. That was painted with my own fair hands, using paint stolen from the paint store up the corridor. Is original wire from the Turing bomb.
Oh, from the actual machine?
Yes. But Alan Turing also had his own mug. We all did.
Did you? What did Alan's look like?
Well, if you were to go into Alan Turing's office, you will see a mug chained to the radiator, because that's what he did.
Well, he chained his mug to the radiator?
Oh, yes.
In case somebody took it?
Absolutely.
Can we say that tea cracked the code at Bletchley? Without tea, you wouldn't have been able to do it?
Oh, without the tea, we would have lost the war, no doubt. We would have all been drinking ersatz coffee.
Exactly. We'd all be speaking German.
So we won the war. Hooray for us. Back to work, everybody. Well, they say everything stops for tea, and now the tea break was enshrined in British law.
Wait. Andrew.
And enshrined in British comedy, we had the tea lady, dispensing not just tea, but common sense.
What's wrong now?
Oh, nothing. Just a rather mysterious phone call from the Far East.
Well, sometimes that's God's way of telling you to think on and look sharp.
But the tea lady would, sadly, eventually be replaced by something much less amusing, the vending machine.
The cup will drop down into what we term the cup station.
And I always liked doing a blind tasting between the hot chocolate and the chicken soup. But while we were all merrily pressing the normal button, tea was sneakily giving itself a makeover and a very funky new look. The biggest revolution in tea's history started in New York in the early 1900s, where one man had an extraordinary piece of luck.
His name was Thomas Sullivan, and like lots of other inventions, none of which I can think of at this minute, it happened by accident, and it would change the world of tea drinking, as far as the English-speaking countries were concerned, forever.
It happened on Front Street in Lower Manhattan, where Sullivan worked as a tea merchant, sending out samples of his tea in little tin boxes. And tea historian Elizabeth Knight says we have a lot to thank him for, and his wife.
So what did Sullivan actually do that we're remembering him for now?
Thomas Sullivan invented the tea bag.
Right, yeah.
And the story is that Mrs. Sullivan is the one who got the bright idea of cutting costs.
No surprise there.
No surprise there. It was expensive to send the samples out in the tins of the day, and Mrs. Sullivan supposedly got the bright idea to sip up a few little mesh silk bags and pack the samples that way.
Right.
So the customers thought that they were intended to be dropped into the boiling hot water and brew the tea.
But that's not what he intended.
No, his customers began writing back saying, send more samples in those great, wonderful tea bags.
Sullivan never patented his invention, so everyone could just copy it. The first paper tea bags arrived in 1930, and we didn't have rectangular tea bags until 1940. By the 70s, we just about got the idea, and we loved them. Even Welsh people love them.
Well, I think tea is a bit messier. I prefer it don't block up the sink and things like that.
Oh, it tastes nicer, that's why. You don't have the old tea leaves in your cup, do you?
Tea bags totally changed the way we drank our tea. All that stuff like the caddy and the teapot and the strainer, that was so yesterday. We went tea bag bonkers.
There's been a revolution in tea bag technology in the last decade.
There's one cup for if you just want one cup.
Pot size.
Drawstring.
Pyramid.
And they're bringing one out for osteoporosis.
Today, 9.5 out of every 10 cups we drink comes from a bag. And the rise of the tea bag coincided with the rise of another British addiction, television. Commercial television began broadcasting in 1955, and viewers were introduced to the ad break, that 2-minute opportunity to put the kettle on. And TV wouldn't just encourage you to make tea, it would urge you to buy it, with some of the most memorable ads ever created.
Oh, look and see there. Tell me that monkey isn't happy.
I'm telling you, that monkey's not happy.
Oh, the classic.
Cream, Mr. Shifter, like refreshment.
Could you draw inspiration from that?
Strangely not.
One way of shifting it.
These are the best ads ever.
They are, but it's the most successful advertising campaign ever.
Yeah.
The most effective. Oh, they made that chimpanzee look like Sue Pollard.
Oh, that looks unsavoury, doesn't it? It's pretty close with her donkey friends there. I'm not sure that's what makes you go, ooh.
Fellow Britons, let your stiff upper lips cavort like a wanton gypsy as they hover.
Now, was this the idea that tea is very, very British, so we need Stephen to tell us?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Over a mug of Twinings.
Oh, but see, I think somebody could rebrand tea. If somebody decided to, if some big tea company decided to go all Starbucks on tea's ass, I bet you could do it.
I get the feeling tea could maybe do with a bit of a rebrand. The Second World War was a long time ago. I don't think we feel the same about tea. Everything has to be instant now. We even want our fortunes read quicker.
You've got to make the tea, you've got to sit down and drink tea with people.
Yeah.
Which, when you're trying to earn money, you really can't bother sitting down drinking tea with people.
If builders don't drink builders, the rot really has set in.
If I'm cold, I might have a cup of tea in the morning, but I'm not one to drink like 10 cups during the day. I prefer to have an energy drink.
How many do you have a day?
I could have 3 or 4 if the lady who runs the cafe.
And we all know, because we're all doing it, what else we're drinking.
I've noticed that the big corporations have come in and took over. I'm not going to mention the name, but the Big Bean.
Yeah.
The Big Bean is out there.
The guilty bean.
A lot of the little greasy spoons in it have disappeared, and I think we've lost something.
which is a shame.
I have felt, making this programme, that there's a nostalgia about tea, really as if its glory days are over, as if, as young people say, it's not with it.
The reality is at the moment, tea is in a fairly long-term decline. Over the last 10 years, the overall consumption of tea has gone down by about 14.5%.
So this is the challenge for the ad men. Tea drinkers are getting older and you can't use chimps. Discuss. Alistair Owen at Dare works on the prestigious Tetley's account. And as soon as he's done his presentation, his mum says he has to do his homework.
And then the other thing is coffee shops having a huge influence. You only have to look at something like that frozen grasshopper mocha to realise quite how diverse the coffee field is now.
Can I just ask you something?
Of course you can.
Do you think people are switching away from, say, 30 years ago when you would have breakfast? You would cook your breakfast at home and you would have it. Now, would you say that that generation is just leaving the house?
Absolutely. They're going into work early, they're getting a coffee from a coffee shop. And so that tea has been directly replaced by a coffee on the go.
Right, girls. Fancy a cuppa?
I knew something good was...
The latest Tetley campaign is stressing the pleasures of sharing a cuppa with your real living friends as opposed to just connecting with people online. And in a celebrity-led culture, as I believe we have now, the hunt is on for a real-life tea-drinking role model, like Lady Gaga. I suppose what we really need in this country is the new Gracie Fields.
My name's Ria. I drink a lot of tea.
I'm Andrew. I have about 1 or 2 cups of tea a week.
I'm Jenny.
2 cups of tea a week? No wonder our wars last so long these days. You may not recognise them by this point in the programme, but these are young people. This is a focus group to find out what they think about tea, or if they think about tea.
Do you think there's any way that you could do with tea what they have done with coffee?
Personally, I think what they need to do is make tea cool.
If it's embraced by somebody that you really love, would that make a difference?
Someone did a massive campaign that was very different, and Lady Gaga, I think, is an example of that.
Yes.
So I think it would change my attitude towards that.
Yeah.
What do you think it is that has made it?
No offence to Lady Gaga, but surely tea can manage without her. I think it's still got a surprise or two up its sleeves. Let's not forget, this is a drink that sparked the American Revolution, that sobered up the workers, drove the British Empire, and helped us see off the Nazis. It has a 5,000-year history. It changed history. We loved it so much we were prepared to travel halfway around the world to get it. I don't think tea's finished yet. If a terrible iced bun you can buy for 20 pence at a school fair can reinvent itself as a £4 cupcake, then surely a brilliant living plant like tea can keep its place in our lives. I mean, I don't know as what, maybe as a gel that you rub on, or we're going to have it implanted under our skin like a contraceptive, or maybe, more likely, we'll all be too poor to afford these fancy coffees and we'll all end up back round the kitchen table making our own beverages. Whatever. I think that somewhere, someone will always be having a nice cup of tea.
News of a special Question Time follows in just a moment here on BBC One, while over on BBC Three it's Lee Nelson's Well, Funny People.